servants forever. Boy, is that great wisdom. What are they saying to Rehoboam? You want these people to serve you? Well, if you want them to serve you, you need to serve them. Because the role of the king is not to oppress his people, but to serve his people. The king is to be a servant of God, being of service to the people he rules. As we said early on, when the kingdom was first established, the king of Israel was never given the authority of autonomy. Every king in the nation was accountable to the king's law, to be subservient to Yahweh, who alone was to be the supreme king of the people. But the record that we find here is the record of one king and queen after another, arrogating to themselves the authority and the respect that properly belongs only to God. And so now the advice and counsel of the elders to Rehoboam is, serve the people, and they will serve you. Well, listen to his response. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. And he said to them, what advice do you give? How should we answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, lighten the yoke which your father put on us? Then the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, thus you should speak to this people who have spoken to you, saying, your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us. Thus you shall say to them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, I will chastise you with scourges. The young bucks are full of themselves. And they grow up and they're sharing and basking in the power of Rehoboam. And they say to him, don't listen to the old men who are weak, and they want you to lessen and diminish the power that you have. Let us stand with you, seize the power, don't give up an inch of that power, and say to these people, my little finger is going to be thicker than my father's waist. If you think you were in trouble with him, then you better buckle under, or I'm really going to put it to you in a way that you've never imagined. And so he made this announcement to Jeroboam and spoke to them according to the advice of the young men. And when this happened, the people answered him by saying, what share do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel, and now see to your own house, O David. And so Israel departed to their tents, but Rehoboam reigned over the children of Israel who dwelt in the cities of Judah. So now the civil war begins, and the nation is divided. And the division of this people was to last for century after century after century. And the subsequent history of the conditions both in the north and in the south reads like a rogues gallery, particularly in the north. No sooner does Jeroboam assume power and control in the northern kingdom of Israel than he goes out and creates two special sacred sites and consecrates a golden calf, saying, this is the God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. He no sooner assumes the power of the northern kingdom than he directs the people into the practice of idolatry. And that becomes a microcosm of the future history of the northern kingdom. Let me just say a couple of things about this period of the divided kingdom that is chronicled here, both in the book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles and in the book of Kings. And I know that people get bogged down reading through this period, but the history that unfolds in the days to come is absolutely crucial to understanding the whole scope of Old Testament faith. The northern kingdom, after the time of division, lasts just about 200 years. And in that 200-year period, there are 20 kings. Now you figured out that the average length of monarchy in the northern kingdom for the rest of its history was 10 years. Now some of them didn't last 10 weeks, but the average is 10 years. And in that period of 200 years, there are 20 kings, 9 families. 9 different dynasties compete for ascendancy in the northern kingdom. You know, we talk about in British history the Tudors and the Windsors and so on, and you talk about the different houses or families from which the monarchs come. Well, in the northern kingdom, there is so much disruption, so much division, so much intrigue, so much internecine rivalry going on that there is no stability. 20 kings, 9 different families. One of the most significant families in the northern kingdom was the so-called House of Omri. Omri was significant for establishing a rival central capital and central place of worship to Judah and Jerusalem. He made the capital of the northern kingdom to be the city of Samaria. Now, you maybe haven't heard that much about Omri. He was as able an administrator and ruler as he was despicably evil in his religious behavior. Omri really accentuated the turning of the northern kingdom to idolatrous practice. And perhaps the most illustrious descendant of Omri in his dynasty was a fellow that you have heard of, who's immortalized, if nowhere else, by Herman Melville as the captain of the Pequod in the novel Moby Dick. Ahab, who becomes the king over the northern kingdom. And Ahab becomes synonymous with evil. And Ahab marries a woman who is militantly pagan and whose desire is to convert the northern kingdom to the worship of her gods, to the renaissance of idolatry in the land. And her name, of course, was Jezebel. She has become so associated with wickedness that even in this day, if a woman is known for extraordinary evil, we say of her, she is a Jezebel. And it was the wickedness in the northern kingdom that provoked in the first instance the uprising of a whole new line of prophets spearheaded by Elijah, whom we'll look at later. In the meantime, in the southern kingdom maintains a certain stability, though it's certainly not an era of great godliness. There are numbered among some of the southern kings some godly men. And there were reforms that took place from time to time during this period. But the southern kingdom, unlike the northern kingdom, lasted approximately 350 years. Now here's what I think is fascinating, that in the northern kingdom, which only lasted 200 years, you had 20 kings, 9 families. The southern kingdom has 20 kings over a period of 350 years, almost twice as long as the northern kingdom, but the same number of kings. And as had been ordained of God and in keeping with his providence, one family. So that the dynastic succession of David remains intact for 350 years after the divided kingdom. So that the house of David is preserved from generation to generation in honor of Jerusalem and the house of God. In 722, the northern kingdom fell to the Assyrian invaders, and the people of the north were taken away captive. In 587 BC, Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians. And so, from this period of division comes the great captivity, where we see finally the fall of both kingdoms, the north and the south. First, the northern kingdom, the fall of Samaria, 722 BC. Later on in 586, the fall of Jerusalem and the fall of the kingdom of Judah. And bleakness and darkness came upon the people as they had lost their heritage, and as the prophet Amos would later declare that the booth of David had fallen. And the throne of David was entangled with snares and with weeds, with rust, and seemingly consigned to everlasting oblivion. But for the promise of God to his servant David, that he would establish his throne forever. And as Amos would say in the coming future, God promises to restore the fallen booth of David. And all of that is screaming towards the future, to the coming Son of David, who is David's greater son, to whom the kingdom is given forever and ever.